is really your core box. It includes your neck, your shoulders, and your hips, and your spine that runs all the way up. So breathing well and accessing a diaphragmatic breath is an important factor in core stability. So the first exercise in the program is face down breathing. You lie down. I usually just stack my hands and put my forehead on my hands and take some time to wiggle my shoulders away from my ears. And then I'm looking for a slow, deep breath to my low back and sides and a little bit to my belly. Trying to breathe below my shoulders. Lifting my low back to the roof. Feeling some pressure out to the sides. And a little bit to the mat on the floor. Another way to practice breathing is in the face-up position. Every time you move off the floor or change your position, breathing gets a little harder. In the face-up position, I usually adjust my chin towards my collarbone and lengthen the back of my neck, and then put my hands at my sides so I can start to feel that diaphragmatic breath in 360 degrees, like I talked about with the face down. I'm feeling not only my belly rise, but out to the sides and some pressure down into my back. I'm really starting to feel like I'm getting the air down deep and not elevating my chest towards my head. My shoulders are nice and relaxed. We can take it to a gentle knee press breath to feel like we're getting some connection between the bottom of our rib cage and the top of your hips. If you take your one knee up towards your hands and press both hands gently into the knee, go through the posture adjustment of the chin. If you have a big arch in your back, you can maybe just decrease that arch a bit, create a little counter pressure, and then give yourself 3 diaphragmatic breaths from here. After 3 breaths, you can change and reposition on your opposite knee. Just gentle pressure, feeling a little connection in through here, and then I've got somewhere deep to breathe to and through. Kneeling position. It's a great position to stretch the front of the hip and the front of the thigh. You want to make sure that in your half kneeling position, your sort of posture is lined up on the down knee. So the knee, the hip, and the middle of the shoulder and the ear would be kind of the line that you're looking for. The other thing when you're in a position like this is, do you have an extended posture? Does your rib cage line up over your hips? There's sometimes a kind of an analogy where people say it's like a bucket and the water will spill out if the bucket is tipped forward. And when you neutralize or line the bucket up, everything through the rib cage just sits nicely over the hips. So I like to give this bucket analogy to people to make sure that their hips are aligned. And then also, is this top knee hip higher than the other? So you can take the hip up to the armpit and bring it back down and kind of say, well, am I level that way as well? When you find a nice level position between these two planes, you usually just feel a mild stretch through the front of the hip. And if you don't, then maybe you're not tight in the front of the hip flexor. You can pulse forward through the knee, but not losing the line of posture. What we used to see was people putting their back into a lot of extension to try and get a stretch in through their hip flexor, and that can put a lot of stress in through the back. So stay upright onto your knee posture. Hold it for breath, assess whether your breath's into your neck and shoulders, whether you're still breathing diaphragmatically, and hold each side for about 60 seconds. So align myself up on the other side. It's a great position to get comfortable finding because not only is it great for stretching in through the front of the hip, But it's a great position to do some shoulder mobility from. And we'll show that in a few slides from now. And that's the half kneeling stretch. Demonstrate the frog exercise. You start the frog by finding your neutral back and then taking your knees wider than your hips. Maintaining your neutral back posture, you can start to hinge your hips back to your heels and then come forward and load into your hands. Now, one of the things with this position is that you want to maintain all of the curves of your back and not go into flexion as you round down or extension as you go down hips to heels. So finding your neutral back and learning how to move your neutral back through the frog rocks, we call this, is really important because this sets you up for a squat position. This is like a squat on the floor. And when you squat, you don't want the position of your back to change, especially under load, because that's a recipe for injury. With the frog rocks, if you want to start to integrate neck mobility, as you sit back, I like to look over my shoulder, look past my foot, come back through neutral, and switch over to the other side. This is a fabulous way to start integrating your neck into your core movement. As you come back through the center, you can just draw your chin back in and lengthen the back of your neck. This exercise, the frog rocks, is a gold standard, I think. I love it. The glute bridge. I'm lying on my back with my feet about hip width apart. If you are one of those people that have a big arch in their back, you might want to work on trying to just decrease that arch a little bit and also drawing your chin down so you're lengthening the back of your neck through the glute bridge. There are a lot of variations of glute bridges, and this is a demonstration of what I would call a hard style glute bridge, where you want to lift the hips to the roof as a unit. So I just kind of give my cheeks a little pat here because I want to squeeze my cheeks a little bit and then press into my feet and lift my hips up to the roof. I'm looking for a line between my knee, my hip, and my shoulder joint. If I don't go high enough, I haven't fully extended my hips and fully used my glutes for that hip extension. And if I go too far, I don't like to demonstrate bad exercise, but you'll see that I would put stress on my back. So every time your hips come back down to the floor, you want to take that time to adjust that posture if you need to with your chin and your back. Press into your feet, squeeze those buns, and lift. We often get asked the question, where should I breathe in the hip bridge? And this is a body weight hip bridge. There's not a lot of demand. It's two legs. I've not got any weight over my hips. If you wanted to coordinate breath, you could initiate an inhale as you lift up, but I believe that you have to dial the amount of breath and intra-abdominal pressure you create with breath to the imposed demand. So at this level of glute bridge, I wouldn't get too concerned about coordinating your breath. Just go through reps. Another cue I quite like is when you're in the top position to envision pushing your knees away towards your toes. This helps to fully extend the hip and it gives you a nice stretch through the quads, especially if you tend to hold some tension or tightness there. This is a great, what we call anti-sitting exercise. If you think about being in a chair and sitting in a chair, your glutes are not being used. It's almost like I'm in a chair now, and then I'm using my glutes to get me out of the chair and strengthen what we coin the glutes as being the back side of the core. Quality over quantity reps. If you feel tired, I would just go ahead and stop. But these double glute bridges are quite safe, and I would be doing at least 10 reps as part of one set. Demonstrate the X lifts from the all fours neutral back position. So you might have gone through the little bit of flexion and extension again to find your neutral back. And then taking the opposite arm and knee off. And here's we talk about whether or not you can control your core box posture, so not losing your posture and not holding your breath as you start to reach the arm and leg out into extension. Now, if you weren't able to maintain the core box and the breath, then you don't want to go for the full extension, because then you're not really getting the benefit of the exercise with the core control. But if you can get out there, you can own it, and like you can tell I'm breathing because I'm talking. I bring it back in with control and switch sides. Now often what we see is that when you take your arm and leg, so you take your levers further away from your center, I'm going to demonstrate kind of what I don't want to see, which is a big dip in the back and or a dip in the hip. So this is or shaking or shoulder collapse or head drop. So these are all common things that we sort of want you to go through a little checklist of, because to really improve your core, you want to hold that posture, that neutral back position, challenge it with the lift, whether that's a short lift and a hold, or you're reaching out to where you can control, where can you own this position. And then once you get stronger, and you will find that this improves quite quickly, you're fully extending through the back leg and the arm, and you can hold this posture for breath cycles, perhaps 1 to 3 breath cycles, and then bringing it in with the control that you showed you had when you extended out. This is the X lifts. There's lots of variations of this that you could do, but I suggest that you own the position for however far you reach and improve your core fairly quickly. The setup for the Mcgill position lift is takes some time. You got to figure this out, okay? So one knee is bent, one leg is straight. You want to think about what your torso is doing. So if you have a big arch in your back, you're going to want to close this, what we call rib, bottom of the rib cage, top of the hip, the rib-hip gap. You want to do that first, so that when you support your head and draw your chin in, your neck core, Dr. Olson likes to talk about the neck core, these deep neck flexors, these are muscles that need to be trained. And so when you start this exercise, you can support your head, draw your chin in, and set that mid-core like I sort of mentioned, and then lift your head and your heel just a little bit off the floor. I want to say most people are going to lift a little higher and flex into this, But the challenge is to do this correctly, is to set your neck properly. So come back down, draw the chin in, feel like your forehead and your sternum are kind of lifting together. And if your neck is very sensitive, you give it a lot of support. Put the tongue on the roof of the mouth and gently close your teeth. And then give yourself that opportunity to set the midsection first, and then come into the lift, and then focus on how long you can hold this with deep diaphragmatic breathing without firing up the neck muscles. So if this is too much, because this is the sort of stage 1 level of this exercise, you're not even going to lift your head. You're just going to have your arms at the sides. You can draw your chin down and gently think about just connecting the back of the head with the floor. So then you find your midsection and just lift your foot. This is for people who have a lot of pain and need to don't have very much strength in their deep neck flexors, and to reset their neck core, you could start at this level. But think about this exercise and how easily you can fire up your neck with this. So please don't do that. Come out of it before you reach that point. Always stay underneath your capacity. This is a very important exercise to integrate your neck with the rest of your frontal anterior core. I'm going to demonstrate the hip hinge exercise. I've got the dowel on my back. For a neutral back, the dowel touches my head, my mid-back, and just below my lower lumbar curve. The hip hinge exercise, you sit your hips back to the wall behind you. Your knees stay somewhat over your ankles or your shoelaces if you have shoes on. And your shins are pretty much vertical. This is the hip hinge pattern, which moves the weight or the body through the hips, as opposed to the squat pattern, which I will demonstrate separately. A lot of times it takes some practice, not necessarily with a dowel, but to learn how to move your body without rounding your back. So hands on the thighs if you don't have a dowel available to you, sitting back and finding the depth that you can go with your body, keeping your back neutral. If you want to add breath, you're going to inhale as your hips go back and exhale as you stand up and find your tall posture, chin tucked in. You can go through lots of repetitions of a hip hinge. We call this kind of greasing the groove of the pattern. You really want to learn and memorize, have your body kind of understand the hip hinge, because it is a foundational movement for exercises that load the hip hinge, which would be called a deadlift, or a kettlebell swing, which is a dynamic hip hinge. And taking your training plan to those exercises without understanding the importance of keeping your back neutral is a recipe for injury. If you were to add load and put pressure on certain parts of your back loaded, then that's where we see problems arise. So bringing it back to basics, you just want to understand how to do a good hip hinge movement. It's nice and safe. Inhale as you sit back. And exhale as you come back up. There you go.
So if you want to practice the hip hinge and you want to practice the deadlift, but you don't have a kettlebell, then you can get something like a bucket of water or a bucket full of cleaning material. So all you're going to do is the exact same thing. You're just going to stand right over the bucket. You're going to bend at your hips, back's nice and straight. Slight bend in your knees. You grab the handle here, and the setup is the exact same. You get tight in the upper shoulders and back, stabilize the core, and bringing hips underneath using those glutes. And then you're just reversing the motion back down to the ground like that.